ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome. It is the evening of the 14th of June, 2025, and here we are on the second official day of what I'm going to call the US-Iran war, with the US adopting the more British method of allowing an outsourced army to do the fighting for it. Now, this, of course, is a reference to the Zionists and their chosen role as the attack dog of imperialism, a role that they embraced from the very beginning of the Zionist movement. This was something that Theodor Herzl himself quite explicitly said, that the Zionism would be the one would be the beachhead of Western civilization in Asia. So the quote from Herzl, which I posted up earlier, is as follows: "There in Palestine we shall be a sector of the wall of Europe against Asia We shall serve as the outpost of civilization against barbarism. Now, of course, given what we know about Western civilization, I suppose you could say that Herzl was entirely correct. And given the amount of death and destruction so-called Western civilization has created, the Zionists are right at home with it. And so the reason why I quote those lines from Herzl from all the way back in 1896 is because from the earliest possible stage, the Zionists were clear about what they wanted to achieve. They knew that the only way they could get their political project off the ground was if they made themselves useful to one imperialist or another. And therefore, they chose initially a partnership with the British, who were very happy to make use of their services. And it was the British who sponsored the creation of the Zionist state. There was, of course, a bit of a falling out between them and the British imperialists later on, but it was a brief falling out, and they were right back on board with the British imperialists again very quickly. But the point about this is that the Zionist movement, together with, in actual fact, the Ukrainian fascist movement, each has only ever been an expression of the whims of one imperial master or another. So, for instance, before there was Banderism, before there was Petlura in Western Ukraine, Ukrainian nationalism was sponsored by, nationalism in heavy inverted commas, was sponsored by Austria-Hungary, and then Petlura was sponsored by the Germans, Austro-Hungarians briefly, and by various different other Western imperialists. Bandera and Shaikevich were, of course, the pets of Hitlerite fascism, and then later on of U.S. imperialism. And as with the Zionists, there's periodically there's a bit of a falling out there between them and their sponsors, but they kiss and make up very quickly. These expressions of petty nationalism have only ever been used in the service of a bigger imperialist power, and this is the legacy that we're dealing with here. And so Zionism has only ever been acting in service to a higher power. It can only exist by acting in service to a bigger imperialist power, just the same as Ukrainian fascism can only exist that way. Without the US and Western Europe backing it, Zionism has no future. It is finished. Now, I mentioned yesterday the tweet from that ridiculous buffoon, Lindsey Graham, which gave away more than old Lindsey intended when he said the war had started and pray for Israel. Now, what that means is that, of course, Israel is going to be doing the fighting. The US, I don't think, has much of any intention of getting into a toe-to-toe fight with Iran. It would be something that the US couldn't win. So what were they aiming for is the question, with the massive decapitation attempt that they put on display yesterday. So what they intended to do, again, this is very similar to the entire Western way of war. And the US is now practicing a way of war which is very similar to that which the British adopted, and which the British have used really for a long time, which is to win by assassination and manipulation. Now, what we can see from observing the decapitation attempts yesterday is that the US, via the Israelis, was looking to take out as many of the senior leadership of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and potentially the political leadership who were aligned with the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei as possible. The aim of that, and the aim of these the very impressive looking, but ultimately not as impressive as they first appeared, strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and the drone attacks, etc., was to create, and this is where I talk about the importance of the psychological operation, was to create the perception of state collapse, was to demoralize the revolutionary elements in Iran, because of course Iran has a lot of contradictions within it, and we'll come to antagonistic and non-antagonistic contradictions later on, and why everybody should read Mao's work on that subject. But the US, the British, and others who study Iran know very well that there are a lot of contradictions there. They know very well that a direct assault on Iran isn't going to work, and so they have to win in other ways. And that other way is, of course, the attempt at color revolutions, the attempt at internal coups, state collapse, etc. And that's what they were attempting with yesterday's strike. That becomes clearer and clearer now, because it turns out that they killed a lot of people. They killed a lot of the hierarchy of the IRGC, though that was a jolt, but it doesn't seem to have actually affected Iran's fighting capacity too much. And they seem to have recovered their faculties quite quickly. The command and control networks of the IRGC and the Iranian army and air force seem to be intact, and the political structure of Iran seems to have not been shaken by the attacks yesterday. So the attempt at triggering regime change in Iran based on the assault on the IRGC hierarchy seems to have failed, and that presents a certain problem for the US, which we'll get back to in just a moment. But what the sources inside Iran are now claiming is that a lot of the strikes on air defense targets from drones deployed inside Iran were, in actual fact, hits on dummy targets. And as proof, the Iranian sources are saying that there's only one explosion, no secondary explosion. So the drone exploded when it hit the targets, and then there was no secondary explosion with the explosive material that would be in an air defense missile going off. So the Iranians are claiming that the Israelis hit a lot of dummies yesterday, which may be true. I don't know at this stage, but certainly it would seem that the missile cities in Iran, the missile cities that the Iranians rely upon for a lot of their deterrent, are unaffected by the Israeli attacks. And it goes along with a certain US and British way of war, and it goes along with the tactics used to a certain extent in Ukraine against the Russians, which is, again, to go cover ground that we did mention yesterday. A lot of the stuff that the Ukrainians do for example, this most recent drone strike on Russian bombers. A lot of that is this is psychological warfare with a real world element, with a commando raid terrorist action element that is designed to trigger a crisis of confidence within the Russian government, within wider Russian society, to feed the belief that Ukraine is winning, that the Russians can't hit back, that the Russian government is pathetic and feeble and can't do anything. The aim of that is to convince the wider population that the war cannot be won, and to trigger some kind of internal coup. Same thing is being applied to Iran. And that's why you've got to be very careful that with the claims coming out of the US-controlled information space with regard to this attack yesterday, and this is a typical maneuver by the US, which is to flood the information space and then hope to cause as much chaos as possible in doing so. It's why you've also got to beware of so-called multipolarists screaming and demanding that Iran immediately levels Tel Aviv, immediately levels basically everywhere. And unless they immediately carpet bomb an entirety of occupied Palestine, and immediately carpet bomb like every single like US base in the region, then what you're going to end up with is, then immediately, then Iran is over. Iran is fucked. They've lost. It's all over. Give up now. Commit mass seppuku in front of the White House or something like that. And you got to be very wary of people who engage and encourage, especially people with big platforms, who engage in and encourage that type of like hysterical behavior. Now, for some of them, it's because they're petty bourgeois leftists who spend all their time online and not organizing in the real world, and spend all their time obsessing over, Iran or Russia or China sweeping their enemies away for them and not having to do the rather difficult job of actually building a revolution inside the imperial core nations. Far better to hope that a powerful country in the global south or the non-imperial countries can sweep away US imperialism. Of course, that job can only ultimately be done by us. So we've come out of the initial phase of sort of psychological warfare. Not only does it seem that the Iranian political and military structures have held together, but Iranian society is rallying together in defense of their country, which is, of course, maybe to be expected, but reveals a certain problem which the imperialists now have, which is that even those who are nominally opposed to the Islamic Republic will rally to the defense of the nation, even if they can't stand the current governmental setup. No, but very few people inside Iran actually want to return to the days of the Shah being a puppet of the West, which is what the ultimate objective of all of this is. So the weaknesses of the US side will become more obvious as time goes on, because with the US having to rely upon the Israeli regime, the more time passes and the more it becomes obvious that the attempt to collapse the Iranian state is not working and will not work, then the crisis within the Israeli regime will grow, and the level of instability in that regime will grow. And so from the Iranian point of view, the whole question here is different to that which a lot of the frustrated ultra leftists are seeing it. The key thing to remember is that the Iranians have more time on their side than the US does. The US is still in a mad dash to try desperately to implement the original plans of the Project for a New American Century. And that, of course, is a 20-plus-year-old document, but it expresses the needs of US imperialism. And the US imperialism needs desperately to have the subjugation of nations like Iran. And so that was what the plan was, and they've been working off it for years, but it keeps going wrong. It keeps going wrong because the masses of any country keep resisting. And the war on Iran was long prefigured. It was people in the US structure arguing that it was an absolute necessity to conduct this war for the purposes of maintaining US power in the region. And from their point of view, they're exactly right. The problem is that if Iran holds together and is able to withstand the bombardment imposed upon it by the Israeli regime on behalf of the US, then that will open up an existential crisis for the Israeli regime. One that it is already in the middle of one crisis, brought on by their failure to defeat Hamas and their failure to defeat Hezbollah, and the Israeli army performing very poorly against anybody who shoots back. If this war grinds on, then in my view, it is more likely that the Israeli regime starts to fall into an existential crisis. Now, the US knows this, which is why they went so much all in on the decapitation strike. It's why they're going to try and kill Ayatollah Khamenei, who I'm sure is very well aware of the risks to his own life and has named an appropriate successor. Decapitation strategies might be disruptive, but anybody who goes up against the US usually ends up having to prepare for such an event. The US, any imperialist power will try to take out the leadership of any state that opposes them or any revolutionary organization that opposes them. And so you need clear lines of succession and reliable people ready to take over. The decapitation strategy on Hezbollah certainly set them back, but it didn't cause the collapse of the organization that they were looking for, and that caused ultimately Israel and the US to ultimately have to agree to some kind of ceasefire in Lebanon. So this is instructive for us, because when we're considering the US way of war, it reveals fundamental weaknesses. A fundamental weakness for the US is their absolute inability to actually commit ground forces themselves. So they cannot, as with Ukraine, as with the Taiwan situation, they cannot commit ground forces to actually invade places like Russia or Iran. It would be too big an ask. You can't do it. And therefore, you have to rely on other measures. You have to rely on an outsourced army. Ukraine, in the case of Russia, Israel, in the case of West Asia. And if that fails you, then you're in serious trouble, because the last time the US had to commit significant numbers of troops to fight a war in a faraway country was, of course, Vietnam. And the other question here is that well, why can't they deploy significant numbers of troops? First of all, they don't have them, and second of all, the US's political regime, the bourgeois regime inside the United States, is too weak to actually be able to do a mass call up of military-age men to go and fight and die in Persia. That they can't do it. Now, they could try it, but it wouldn't work. They would get some volunteers, some people who would sign up, but not very many. And when they tried to launch some kind of military operation in a place like Russia or Iran, they would be faced with a mass casualty event, the likes of which the US has not sustained, not even in the Vietnam War, not even in the Korean War, not even in World War I or World War II. I mean, you would be looking at hundreds of thousands dead if they committed seriously to it. And the US's regime cannot withstand that. The US imperialists are always a lot weaker than they appear to be. I mean, we go back to Mao's phrase about being a paper tiger very often, but let's examine what they're trying to do to manage this imperial entity of theirs that has stretched globally. It depends upon the active collaboration of an awful lot of compradors, always did. Or it depends upon people like the Banderites in Ukraine, the Zionists in Israel, the various different collaborationists in Iran, who staff the ranks of the CIA-sponsored terror gangs in Iran. If you don't have those collaborationists, if you don't have an outsourced army that can go and fight for you, if you don't have like fascist mercenaries, death squads in the South American nations, if you don't have the MEK in Iran or various different separatist groups, then you have to deploy your own men to do this. That's the point where the empire gets exposed, because it can't fight. And even the empire's proxies, such as Israel, have also been revealed to be lacking in motivation and be unable to fight against a disciplined nationalist organization. And this has been revealed since the events of October the 7th, 2023, nearly 2 years ago now. So this is a severe problem for the US, and its enemies have slowly worked it out, which is that so much of what the US does is based on a projection of power, which is a power that is illusory when you go looking for it. Yes, US has an awful lot of capital at its disposal. They can move around an awful lot of money. They can manipulate markets. They can, by the imposition of sanctions on you, starve you of capital and goods. And if you're in any way linked into the global market, which the US has dominated for years, that will have a severe impact on you. But the US has now overplayed its hand when it comes to the sanctions regimes. Iran has difficulties, but they've survived an awful lot of sanctions for many, many years. The DPRK has survived this, and it has come to the point now where it's clear and obvious that the DPRK is the much stronger career. I mean, my admittedly rather cursory examination of like the military strength of the DPRK, combined with, especially when you combine its pre-existing military strength with its new its air force upgrades that are being implemented from its partnership with Russia, to its battle experience in the Ukraine war. The DPRK's armed force could probably storm through the south, including wiping out the American contingent in a pretty rapid fashion. I think that the southern Korean state, which is essentially a US puppet state, is incredibly weak and brittle, which is why its political system keeps falling to pieces, and various different ultra-reactionary factions have tried coups recently. So the point about all of this is that the US and its bloc has always been weaker than it appears. The image of it as being undefeatable is precisely that, an image. Now, this isn't to say that they don't have strengths. The ability to control global trade is a real strength. The ability to move gigantic amounts of capital around, that's a real strength. The ability to run the kind of psychological operations and manipulation operations that they do in places like Iran, in places like Ukraine, Armenia, the Central Asian states, Russia itself, before they got cleared out of there. All of these things do matter, but the big realization that has come across the opponents of the US over the last few years is that the old paper tiger thing, which is that without their local collaborators, the US doesn't have anything. So, for instance, the Russians banned a hell of a lot of the US propaganda and British propaganda organizations. In my view, they should have done it an awful lot quicker. And if you take away the ability of their local collaborators to act against you, US might shout and scream and impose sanctions and jump up and down, but they can't invade. So they, even before like the development of the DPRK's nuclear weapons program, the US would have found the level of casualties the DPRK could impose upon them far too costly and unacceptable if it came to a military confrontation. Just as the US and the British, no matter what Keir fucking Starmer says, can't walk into Ukraine. The US can't, and Britain can't walk into Iran and back up Israel. They just can't do it. For all that there's an awful lot of garden variety racists in Britain who would, scream and shout and jump up and down about Western civilization and the white race and stuff like that, and defend Israel with the beachhead of Europe in West Asia. Ask them to go and strap on some body armor, pick up a gun, and jump out of a landing craft and try and storm Iran. Not many of those guys are going to go off and do it because they'd all die, or many of them would die. Same with the Ukraine thing. The only solution is that for the imperialists with regard to Iran is to keep doing what they're doing now, which is keep the Israeli regime striking at targets in Iran, keep trying to assassinate Ayatollah Khamenei, maybe even Pezeshkian as well, keep trying to cause destabilization and hope that some kind of internal crisis emerges which causes the Iranian state to collapse. That's the tactic. That's the only play they've got here. And the usage of the internal contradictions and antagonisms inside Iran to generate fighters who will act for U.S. imperialism on the ground. So Kurdish separatists, Balochi separatists, various people in like the liberal, bourgeois liberal end of the Iranian population who will, for reasons of their own, join with the imperialists or sign on with the imperialists to carry out terror and insurgency operations inside Iran itself. This is the only move. These are the moves that they've got available for them. And the longer this goes on, and the Iranian state not only doesn't collapse, but shows the ability to continue to hurt the Israeli regime, the more clueless and without answers the US will look, because they can't get involved themselves. Yes, they could start bombing Iran themselves. They could come out completely from behind the curtain. I mean, Trump's pretty much discarded the curtain already. They could come out and try and launch their own massive bombing raids on Iran. They would probably have to do this from like Diego Garcia and various other distant bases, though, or using naval assets in the region. But the Yemenis already showed the extreme limitations that imposes upon you. Ansar Allah, because they had the Yemeni nation rallied and unified behind them, and they deprived the US, Britain, and Israel of spy networks on the ground, were able to hold out against this air war and naval warfare, and in fact shoot down and endanger US military assets to the point where the US had to quit. Now, we now turn to the question of contradictions inside Iran, which the US imperialists hope to exploit. Now, clearly, these are there, and they have been there since the days of the Islamic Revolution itself, and the US seeks to exploit these at every turn. So, what are the contradictions inside Iran? Well, there's a quite clear class contradictions there. And now I would urge everybody to go and look at the work of Bahman-Azad in the talks that he's given to the ICSS on Sundays. You can go into their YouTube channel, find his discussions there, or the discussion I had with him on this channel. Now, the point that he has made is that there's a lot of class contradictions inside Iran, because what you have is a revolution inside Iran that was powered by, yes, middle class elements in the cities, but also the primary strength of that revolution was proletarian and peasant, and those were the people who that was when the proletarians and the peasantry moved into action against the Shah's regime. The Shah's regime imploded and collapsed, and it was the Iranian proletarians and peasantry who sacrificed themselves in huge numbers to defend the nation against the attacks from the Ba'athist regime of Iraq, headed by Saddam Hussein. Now, because the Iranian, because Khomeinism, in its various forms, is a contradictory beast. It's got strong, it did have anyway, strong pro-working class elements to it, and it had it talked about things like workers' control, for instance, a little bit early on, and there's certain legacies of that do survive. But you've got very strong pro-capitalist elements inside Iran, including a comprador capitalist element, and you have large elements of the petty bourgeoisie, particularly in Tehran, who are enamored with the idea of living like the Westerners do, or more to the point, I think, living like the upper echelons in the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia do, or living like Western Europeans do. Of course, these people are completely and utterly divorced from reality if they think that that's what's going to happen. I mean, maybe for a few of them would get paid off if Iran was returned into the domination of the West, but mostly Iran would end up like Ukraine or worse if those people were elevated to power. Of course, the idiot liberals in Iran don't realize that, and certainly the Pahlavists don't care. The Iranian monarchists, I mean, I've met some of these people. They don't care if the Iranian proletariat and peasantry is reduced to utter misery, as long as they get to be kings over the ruins, which is what you've got to realize about an awful lot of these comprador types. They don't care about the nation. They only care about their place within it, and their place within it, they think, should naturally be at the top. And it doesn't matter if the top is a throne built out of rubble, as long as they get to be in that throne. Same with the Iranian compradors as the Ukrainian compradors. Doesn't matter how much ruin and death is inflicted upon the nation, as long as they get to run things afterwards. And that's a problem inside Iran. I mean, we go back to Mao's work on contradictions, which are antagonistic and non-antagonistic, and how one can manage the contradictions in a way that doesn't turn them into antagonisms. Now, China in the 50s, when it had, I mean, it's always had multiple classes inside what is a People's Republic of China, and tries to manage and as they do today, the class contradictions in a way that is, as they would put it, non-antagonistic. I mean, this is the work done on this by Mao on how to manage contradictions is frequently cited by the likes of Xi Jinping. But it is an important lesson to bear in mind for countries which are essentially like Iran, which is, I would argue, a sort of religiously inspired People's Republic to an extent, and how you manage these contradictions in a way that stops your enemy exploiting them. So this is a challenge which I'm sure many in the Iranian system are aware of. But if you're up against US imperialism, which has as its go-to move is to exploit antagonistic contradictions within the system, then you and your response to that have to make sure that those contradictions are managed in such a way as to turn them into non-antagonistic contradictions. This is tough, and it's especially tough for a non-proletarian dictatorship. I mean, Iran is I would say, a revolutionary, religious nationalist government, but one which has a very powerful bourgeoisie within it. And the only real way to unify a nation with multiple ethnic groups, multiple religions within it, though the dominant religion, of course, being Shia Islam, is to build a shared sense of nationhood, which in my view can only come from the elevation of the masses into the position of becoming the ruling class. That's how ultimately you deal with this, by removing the power of the bourgeois elements to make trouble. That's a challenge. It's a challenge in Russia. It's a challenge in Iran. These are internal struggles that will go on because, and this has become obvious, as long as you have these contradictions inside Iran, which are antagonistic, and let's re-emphasize the point, there are antagonistic contradictions there. There are comprador elements there. There are minority nationalities, like Kurds and Balokis, whose grievances can be weaponized by the imperialists, and people from those groups can be recruited to serve as terrorists, insurgents, etc., agents of the West. So you, if you're under siege, like the Iranians are, have to try and resolve this somehow. Now, there are those with much greater knowledge of the actions of the Iranian government with regard to this, but if you don't resolve it, if you are not able to turn these contradictions at the very least into non-antagonistic contradictions, then you're going to keep getting done over by internal subversion. And that's something which is clear that there is still an awful lot of human intelligence sources informing the US and Israel and the British about, say, the movements of senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders. So how did they know where all these guys would be? I mean, yes, you can find somebody's home, but to be able to know where they are at any particular moment in time requires a good deal of human intelligence. Somebody or multiple somebodies were informing the US as to where the likes of Bagheri and Salami were. Again, that's that's what happened. That's a problem. It's a security problem for Iran. But as always, like, there's no such thing as just a security problem. If we're examining this in the Marxist-Leninist fashion, you can't just say, oh, well, that's a security problem. But it could, because a security problem that is derived from an antagonistic contradiction is also a political and economic problem. If you've got certain segments of the Iranian population who are willing to sell themselves to imperialism, then you have to actually work out as to why. And there's a comment coming from Sean Moon who says it's probably Mujahideen al-Khalq operators. That may well be the case. I mean, the MEK has been a well-funded group that has been active, running terrorist campaigns inside Iran for a very long time. So their hand being in this, I would not be surprised at all if they were involved. Certainly, I think it would be the kind of thing that they would have trained for years. But it won't just be them. There are other people from whom the US can recruit. So this goes back to the point about there's no such thing as just a security problem. You have to consider the complete set of relations in which security problems come from. So if they're able to recruit internally inside Iran, then you have to identify, or any country, you have to identify the areas they're recruiting from. Who are the people that are the recruits for the Western operators? Where do they come from? Why are they joining? You have then a security element to that problem, which is how do you stop the internal insurgents and terrorists and agents of the West from carrying out their operations? That's the security element to the problem. That's like a police and intelligence problem. But then you have the other problems based on, like, well, how do these people get a base inside your country? Are there problems with the internal policy with regard to minority nationalities? Are there areas of the country which are significantly underdeveloped, and therefore it's easy prey for the imperialists in terms of recruiting people into ultra-reactionary organizations? This was the problem that the Chinese faced in Xinjiang, which is why were people joining these terror gangs that were being employed by the US and Turkey, by the way, who Erdogan was active in this. And part of the problem was that Xinjiang was very, very poor and underdeveloped, meaning that anybody who could move a bit of money around could recruit like a terror gang pretty quickly. And so the struggle against the reactionary Islamic movements in Xinjiang took the form of, yes, a security operation to round up and arrest the terror gangs, but also, like, you have to then take away the grounds upon the fertile ground upon which these wretched seeds grow. So you have to reorganize things in such a way as to deny them the opportunity to recruit, choke off their recruitment, because you can't just deal in repression. You have to identify the problems and lead to people joining up with such organizations. So it has to be a security approach. There needs to be an economic approach. There needs to be a political approach as well to reintegrating, like, these areas which have become hotbeds of recruitment for the CIA, Mossad, and MI6, and the gangs that they run. And you have to reintegrate them back into the home polity. What's great about doing anything with Iran in the title is you immediately end up with a whole bunch of weird trolls in the chat who could be Trotskyites, they could be Zionists, they could be liberals, or they could be all of the above. They could be members of the AWL. So there is clearly a need, and I'm sure that there are elements in the Iranian government who are aware of this, to actually address the problem of the internal collaborators, because it's clearly extensive. And the US and the British and Israel have been putting a lot of time and a lot of resources into recruiting these networks and using them as sabotage operations. And that needs to be resolved. Where does this go from here? Now, Israel is, of course, attacking Iran again tonight, but I will not necessarily make a prediction, but I will state my view here, which is that if the Iranian position holds, and I have every reason to believe that it will, because the Iran's alliance with China and Russia is solid. The Russians and the Chinese have every motivation to make sure that Iran weathers this storm and comes out the other side. The Israelis, I think, have thrown their best punch. And therefore, the question is, what does the master in the Pentagon do now? Do they carry on hurling attacks at Iran in the hope that that something will come up, and they will manage to secure their regime change in Iran? Or when it becomes obvious that this isn't working, do they back off and try something else? I think they might have blown it, though, because now, thanks to Trump's stupidity and his inability to keep anything secret, it becomes absolutely obvious that you can't negotiate with the US about anything. You can't trust the US to keep its word on anything. It's pointless negotiating with them. And so, therefore, the only solution is to try and win something in a military and political fashion. This is the problem now facing Iran and Russia, and will face China eventually, which is that the US will not negotiate with you. This is the thing. They will not negotiate because they can't. They require the subjugation of all of these countries, the conquest and the asset stripping of all of these countries. And they all know this now, which is why them and the DPRK have all got to stand together and support each other as the flailing and decaying empire lashes out at each of them in turn. But on the upside, they are still bound by the limitations on their power. They can't invade Iran. They've got to rely on the Israeli proxy, which is weakening every day. So we will pause there and turn to comments in the chat, etc. I'm going to go right back to the top now to say hello to various people and take a swig of juice here. So let's start from the top and just say I hope you all enjoyed the intro video. That was done for us by good comrade Red Chilean. Be sure to follow him on X. Really good cutting together of bits of footage from the revolutionary past there with the great Lenin song from the Soviet Union in the 1970s. That's going to be part of our intro in the all shows to come. So I hope you enjoyed that, and big thanks to Red Chilean for doing that for us. So we got Nikki from Athens, we have Victor, we have Dr. Ahmed from Egypt, we have Carter Mann saying, "Greetings from Seattle. What are the possible outcomes of all this? Should we take seriously the threat of this turning nuclear?" I mean, it's always plausible. I mean, it's always possible that this could turn nuclear. I don't think that it will, because I don't think even a nuclear strike could save the Israeli regime. I just don't. More to be said about that when I've done some better research into the US's nuclear capabilities, because there's a lot to be said there. Okay, thanks to all 545 of you watching at the moment, 296 on YouTube, 232 on X. And thanks to everybody who's watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Hello to Holger from Sweden, Slumbering Colossus, Edward, our Latvian comrade, Caustic Grip, Pavel, Lamar Passmore, Rob from the wrong side of the Pennines. So I guess I should probably revisit that judgment now, considering that I'm no longer on that other side of the Pennines. Right, we've also got Comrade Davey, Colchester Ian, Jerry, Jenny, our moderator. Thank you for your service. We've got Kobe, Mo 1917. We have James Graham. We have Alistair. We have Ness Fight over there on Twitch. We have Robert Taffy Seaborn joining us from southeastern Queensland. We've also got Travis, who says that globe is red from all the death that communism has caused. Well, if you're going to get into fantasy, find better authors than Solzhenitsyn, brother. Right. Try, Terry Pratchett or Michael Moorcock or Tolkien, for instance. By the way, in the future, potential review of Lord of the Rings coming up. The book, not the films. Molotov Cocktail says, I see Americans say they don't want to fight an Israeli war, when in truth it should be the Zionists saying they don't want to fight an American war. It's a good point, which is, what do the Zionists think is going to happen to them? If you're watching this in Israel now, and I know we've got some people that do, just ask yourselves this question. What do you think is going to happen to you when you can no longer play the role that Theodore Herzl assigned to you? What do you think the US is going to do? What do you think the British and the French are going to do? You think they're going to stick with you through thick and thin? You think the US is going to continue to pay you all this money to support you if you're no longer able to fulfill the task assigned to you? If it's more costly to keep you in business than to abandon you, what do you think will happen? Do you think your fate will be any different than the Rhodesians or the Pieds Noirs in Algeria or the Boers in South Africa or the Portuguese settlers in Namibia or Angola or Mozambique? What do you think is going to happen to you in the end? You think this is a way forward? This is a losing prospect for you. Eventually, and it will happen sooner than you think, you will be found to be expendable. Just look at what the British and the Americans have done with their proxies in the past. Where are the South Vietnamese now? Where are the Assyrians that the British used to use as an auxiliary force? This is going to end badly for you, and the better thing to do, if you have the possibility, is to get out now, because this is going to end in a very, very negative fashion. And by the way, I know a lot of American politicians will, if you go to Washington, D.C., will slap you on the back, shake you by the hand, and say, you know what, we stand with Israel no matter what. They are the beachhead of Western civilization in a barbarous world, and we must stick by them forever and ever. And Trump will say to you, no one has ever been more pro-Israel than me. No one. I sent that Mike Huckabee guy, that fat guy, over to Israel. He's a great guy, wonderful guy, loves meatballs. And you'll feel very special when you get the likes of Keir Starmer saying how much he loves Israel and will dry hump it to death if necessary. But they'll all abandon you in the end, Zionists. You'll be left on your own, because in the end, imperialism makes rather brutal calculations, and they're not sentimental. Some of the people in the U.S. power structure might get all misty-eyed about, supporting the Zionists to the bitter end, but the great bulk of the American ruling class are brutal and unsentimental, and they'll be brutal and unsentimental with you in the end. So all of this killing, all of this death, all of this murder that you've been engaging in for so long, what do you think is going to leave you in the end? It's going to leave you with your dicks in the wind, pissing into a hurricane. Think about it. Kobe says Trump actually gave Netanyahu the green light. People still think Israel controls America. Yeah. If you think that, then you're either very ill-informed, which a lot of people are, let's be honest, and we've all been ill-informed at various stages of our lives, so let's not hold that against anybody. But there's an awful lot of people out there who are deliberately misinforming people, who are putting out, if anybody is still putting out the idea that Israel controls the United States, that person is full of shit. I'm going to be quite blunt about this. They are misleading you. They are playing the role of apologists for US and British imperialism. They are covering up the crimes of US and British imperialism, and they are lying to you. Anybody who tells you that the Zionists are this all-powerful group that controls somehow Britain and somehow control the United States, this is absolute fucking nonsense. The regime change war against Iran is being waged via the Israeli proxy because of the limitations on American and British power. But it is a US and a British war. The Israelis are pulling the trigger, but the US, principally, with the British playing a supporting role, are doing everything else. So anybody still telling you that Israel controls America, that person is a liar. Right. All right, where are we? Let's just go through some more comments here. Grey Zones Blumenthal says Red Chilean. When he said he was in Iran, he was surprised to see how many people were influenced by Western sources and want to do a Shah restoration. Yeah, well, those, as somebody else says, those people seem to be like the ones in Britain I've met are always these like middle class types, upper middle class types. The people who did well under the Shah, the people who powered the Iranian revolution was like the Iranian proletariat and peasantry, and that's they've done well better out of the Islamic Republic than they did under the Shah, certainly. And that's the strength of the Iranian revolution. It's in the masses. And the problem that I think it's had since the late 80s is that the role of the masses has been downgraded. But it's the Iranian masses who will win any war for them. And therefore, the revolutionary spirit needs to be revived at the base of Iranian society. It'll be the proletariat and peasantry who is able to fight this thing to a finish, not the Iranian capitalist class or the comparatively weak petty bourgeoisie. Just scrolling here. Gabriel A says, I know many Iranians who reminisce about the last and the Persian Empire. I think it's nationalism as well. It's fatigue with religious leadership. Well, you can fantasize about the great Persian Empire all you like, but it will remain an absolute fantasy. Because, like, well, under the monarchy, under the Persian monarchy, they lost the Persian Empire. It got dismantled. Iran got turned into a semi-colony. That was all under the various dynasties of the Iranian monarchy. So what the hell do these people think they're going to get back? It's a fantasy. The same way all of this like petty nationalism, which is sponsored by imperialism, it's just fantasies. So it's as delusional as like the Zionists. It's as delusional as the Banderites. That this idea that we were once kings and we will get back what has been taken from us. How exactly? How are you going to do that, Pahlavi fans, when you're the servant of US imperialism? What, you think they're going to give you back Iraq? Of course they're not. You are destined to be the doormat upon which imperialism wipes its feet forever and ever, and you will never break out from that. Yeah, neither will the Zionists, neither will the Banderites. Ben Jerome on Twitch says America has the most sophisticated and capable military artillery in the world. No, you don't. I mean, I'm not an expert, but even I can tell you that you don't. What have you practiced on in the last 30 years? Blowing up Afghan peasants? I would say that the most capable military artillery in the world right now probably belongs to the Russians, because they're the ones who've actually developed their capabilities the most comprehensively, which is why other militaries are looking to learn from them. I don't think the US can lay the claim to be the most sophisticated and capable of any like branch of like the armed services now. There's an argument to say that they are in terms of submarine warfare, that they've still got the best submarine fleet in the world. I've heard contrary views on that, though. So stop sucking yourself off and calm down, mate. Right. Okay. So I'm going to go through, take some more questions here. Iran needs to make a deal, or else they will be neutralized. Is this Ben Jerome? Is this Donald Trump? Is this Donald Trump himself who is making this shit up? Right. What else we got here? Right. Ramzi Nazir says nuclear arm Pakistan says it will defend Iran. Massive escalation of attacks on Russia. The UK Conservative leader has said Ukraine and Israel are fighting proxy wars on behalf of the West. At what point do we accept that we are in the middle of World War III? World War III, in the sense that World War I and World War II existed, won't happen. Precisely because of the capacity for it to expose and destroy US power very quickly. The US will hurl proxies and try various different tricks on its enemies. So they've tried this with Russia, with Ukraine. They'll be looking for other people to recruit into this war against Russia. I mean, they wanted Georgia to do something. Not that Georgia could stand for more than about 5 minutes against the Russians. They wanted Armenia to do something, and all they've succeeded in doing in Armenia is destroying Armenia itself. They would want the Central Asian republics, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, to try and do something against the Russians, but I don't think they're going to get their way there either. Proxy wars and puppeteering is what the empire has left, because there's going to be no significant threat of invasion to the continental United States. And so they're not going to be able to whip up this great fear of the external enemy invading, because there's just simply not going to be an invasion. It's just a ridiculous idea that they, either the Russians or the Chinese are going to pile into Alaska and march south. I mean, that, stick to hearts of iron if you want to do that. Okay, so going back to more questions. Yes, to answer, Netanyahu has held an American passport and has an American social security number. He's a Polish American who has the job of being a colonial administrator, which is why his family live a large part of the time in Florida. Rosemary asks, do you think they are attacking BRICS, Russia and Iran, because they know the end is nigh of their empire? Well, Russia and Iran, rather. Well, yes, they have said that to secure their dominance. I mean, talking as far back as 30 years ago, the US was talking about securing its dominance by basically ensuring that Russia was ruled by a neo-colonial administration, and the same way Ukraine was. And that plan fell apart by the end of the 90s due to Russian resistance against it, which came to be personified in the new balance of forces expressed by the Putin system, the Putin-led system. So they are attacking by various means Russia, Iran, and ultimately China, because these are centers of resistance to US domination, and they have to destroy them quickly, because the empire itself, the US unipolar moment is ending and is falling apart around us. They need an infusion of loot into their system to try and rebalance themselves, and that could come from Russia or China or Iran. They'd need all of them, though, to make the system right itself again. So that they are getting increasingly desperate, and this is why things are as they are. So yes, Netanyahu did graduate high school from the United States, and he will be going back there before too long. And yes, as Guillermo says, it's not Netanyahu, it's Mileikowski. Yeah, that's his actual name, Benjamin Mileikowski. He's a Polish guy, you know, which is of course something which can't be admitted to. Just scrolling back. Didn't the Serbs once shoot down a stealth fighter and said we didn't know we weren't supposed to see it? Yes, very true. They did do that, and they danced on the wreckage of it. In fact, and there is of course talk. I haven't seen confirmation of this thus far that the Iranians have shot down at least one, possibly two F-35 jets. And if that's true, then that's a big deal. If the Iranian air defense can, allegedly with Russian assistance, can shoot down Israeli F-35 jets, then the Israelis don't have air superiority over Iran. And if they keep losing aircraft, then that's going to, again, create problems. My guess is that unless they manage to secure some kind of big breakthrough in terms of destabilization of the Iranian government in the next few days, that they'll quit this war. They'll desperately look for some kind of way out to stop an imminent collapse. Because even if the US has been flooding Israel with like weaponry and munitions, at a certain point, Israeli society is going to become more and more unstable. It's pretty unstable now, to the point where it could internally collapse. And my guess is that the US, much like it will with Ukraine, will, though that's more of a British project now, will push and push and push until Israel gets on the point of collapse. And if Israel collapses, then the US will dust its hands off and walk away. Rather, with more difficulty though, because if Israel goes, then that's just the first stage of a wider problem for the US, which is a liberation war being waged for the dismantling of the colonial regime, neo-colonial regimes. So al-Sharaa in Syria, the wretched, contemptible little shit that's the king of Jordan, the Saudi regime itself, the UAE regime, all of these countries which are dependent upon the largesse and protection of US and British imperialism, many of which were created, as Jordan was, as the UAE was, as Saudi really was, by the sponsorship of the British and the Americans. If British and American power in the region starts to fall apart, then you'll see all of these countries get threatened. Now remember, by internal revolt. Now remember what the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine said back in the 60s. They were against US imperialism, Zionism, and Arab reaction. Well, that's what we should bear in mind. It's not just Zionism that's the tool of the US, it's also Arab reaction. And Arab reaction is something which will need to be defeated if that part of the world is to be able to move forward. Now, Socialist J says in the chat, I've heard that they already sent a bunch of troops to Israel and are prepared to back them. Okay, well, how many? You're referring, Socialist J, to the US sending troops to Israel. Well, what good are they doing in Israel? What can they do against Iran? Now, will the US send special forces into Iran to do sabotage and assassination and terroristic operations? Yeah, maybe. In fact, I would say it's almost certain that they will. What are a bunch of American ground troops doing sitting in Israel? What good are they going to do in a fight against Iran? Now, there's a reason why the US might deploy troops in a major way inside Israel, and that is to try and stabilize it. If it's looking like that the Israeli regime is going to collapse, there's a chance that the Americans might try to stabilize the situation by taking direct control of the Israeli state and taking it off the likes of Netanyahu and co. That's a chance. I'm not sure how much of a chance that is. But what are a bunch of Americans sat in Israel going to do exactly? again, let's revisit the possibilities of like the US actually launching some sort of invasion of Iran. Very, very limited possibilities, to bordering on impossible. So again, what are a bunch of American troops sitting in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem going to do, other than operations inside Israel itself? Now, they've been doing operations against the Palestinians. That was given away by Dumbo Biden when he was greeting a bunch of American Special Forces guy. Well, Socialist Joe replies saying, I don't see them stopping Israel. All the mainstream news is saying our military is ready to back up Israel. Okay, how? How? And is the US in a position where it can actually back up the Israeli regime? Yes, they could do bombing campaigns. They could do, as I said, like launches from sea-based naval assets, of course, missile launches, bombing raids. Is the US going to invade Iran? Can it invade Iran? No, it can't. So they can, fucking bourgeois press, Socialist J, can say all kinds of shit. Like the British press says that the British army is ready to march on Ukraine and take on the damn Ruskies. It's not going to happen. Like CNN and Fox News can say anything they like about we've got Israel's back, we're there all the way, etc., etc. Okay, well, how? How are they going to go back up the Israelis? How are they going to assault Iran? Are they going to launch an invasion? No, they can't do that. They're already stretched to fuck with this war in Ukraine. They're already like stretched their military capabilities out, and they would need to muster a hell of a lot of men if they wanted to do some kind of action against Iran. It would be ridiculous. They'd end up losing many men. So the bourgeois press can say whatever the fuck they like. Most of it is propaganda directed at a domestic audience, trying to convince the section of the American population that still watches these fucking channels that they're still capable, they can still get it up, etc. But by support, what they mean is like slapping Israel on the back and saying, "Good lads, go on." It's why Lindsey Graham says pray for Israel, because Lindsey Graham knows very well they ain't marching against Iran anytime soon, and everybody knows that. The US won't take the risk of marching against Iran because it would demolish once and for all any remaining lingering illusion of US military supremacy. That's the problem that they're facing, and they can babble on and rave about how powerful they are, and go on and on about the great American military and all that. Have their little shitty parade in Washington D.C. They still can't do anything though. The best they can do is to try and exploit the contradictions and antagonisms inside Iran itself. Right. And yeah. Okay. Molotov Cocktail says the narrative is set for US help because they'll trot out their lie of enriched uranium, etc. Again, though, let's revisit the the question: how is the US going to help out here? Are they could, as I've said, try and do bombing raids, try and increase sabotage and terroristic operations, but what else are they going to do? Again, like it's a very, very difficult question for the US to address, and they can't have an honest discussion with the domestic population about it because it's too difficult to sell. What are you going to do? Tell a bunch of dirt poor guys from Alabama that they've got to go and die horribly in Iran for the purposes of what? US oil companies' share prices? Or telling them that they're dying for Israel, which of course they're not. How is that going to work? Right. Okay, so we are approaching the 8:30 mark here. There's 599 of you watching. My thanks to everybody who's tuned in. I'm going to be back with you again tomorrow. look with an update on this. But until then, I'll thank everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everybody who supports the program on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. So until then, thank you for watching and good night.